G'day, I'm DK.
And I'm Ardeet.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Two Ticks Town Talk, a segment from the Australia Talks podcast.
Yeah, this is one of our favourite parts of bringing the podcast to you, our listeners.
So please enjoy this segment from the regular podcast.
I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Across the desert, square, man. I've breathed the mountains, and man.
All right, this week we return to the lovely town of Stanley in Tasmania, part 2. So for those who haven't heard part 1 yet, and I'll link in the show notes, brief recap on the town itself. It's a small historic fishing village or fishing town on the northwest coast of Tassie, located at the base of the Nut, which is a prominent 143-metre high flat-top volcanic plug. Now, you asked me last fortnight, DK, if there are any local legends about the Nut or Moonutraka, as the local mobs call it. Other than the naming, I couldn't find anything dreaming or even more recent. No, yeah.
Oh, that's a little bit disappointing. I mean, maybe there was, but it's been lost, perhaps. You know.
Well, yeah. Given how many of the Tasmanian Aboriginals were killed, maybe. But yeah, I thought there might be something in there. So look, if you've got closer ties and you've got something that the internet's not telling me, as always, send us AustraliaTalks at proton.me. If you've got more information on that, we'd love to hear it and update the other mates of the podcast. One thing I didn't mention last week is you can actually climb up to the top via a track. It's about an hour, and there's also a chairlift ride that you can get to the plateau on top, which is apparently it's great views all round, as you would expect from something up that high.
Yeah.
Yeah, so last census, town had a population of 595. The area was traditionally occupied by Aboriginal Tasmanian groups, particularly the Pirappa people, and European-wise, it was settled by the Van Diemen's Land Company from 1826, who developed a port and later as a tourist destination, where preserved colonial buildings while remaining a working fishing port. As we discussed in part 1, the Van Diemen's Land Company didn't exactly cover itself in glory with how it handled relationships with local people and local fauna. And spoiler alert, if you haven't heard part 1, it's as bad as what you would imagine. Interesting though, Stanley has another side, and that's it to its environmental coin, and that's the focus of this week's Two Ticks Town Talk. It's centering around Bill Mollison. If you don't know the name, I'll fire in a word soon, and you'll think, okay. So his full name's Bruce Charles Mollison, but he went by Bill. Left school he was born in Stanley in Tasmania. Left school at 15 to run the family bakery, and over the following decade worked as things like a shark fisherman, a seaman, forester, mill worker, trapper, snarer, tractor driver, and naturalist. He got out amongst it. So his experiences in the Tassie coastal and forested environments gave him a real sort of direct hands-on knowledge of local ecosystems. In 1954, at 26, he joined the Wildlife Survey section of the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, the good old CSIRO. And then in the 60s, he worked as a curator at the Tassie Museum with the Inland Fisheries Commission. He went to the University of Tasmania in 1966, where he studied biogeography. And after graduating, he lectured at the university and developed a unit in environmental psychology, and retired from formal teaching in 1979. So not actual teaching, as we'll see, but formal teaching. So his observations of the Tasmanian natural systems, particularly the marsupials browsing in the rainforests around 1959, made him question conventional industrial agriculture. So he's struck by the life-giving abundance and rich interconnectedness of these ecosystems, and noted in his diary that these systems could be designed to function similarly. And he became very concerned and was a bit of an activist about the degradation caused by industrial methods, the soil erosion, dependence on non-renewable resources, pollution of land and water, loss of biodiversity, and also removal of topsoil. So after years of protest work, he thought, I'm going to withdraw, try and develop some positive alternatives, which was a bit of a hallmark of his character, getting out there and saying, well, what can we actually do about it? So he had observed patterns of interplay between human beings, agriculture and the environment, and he was very much inspired by the way that Indigenous people around the world and Aboriginal people here in Australia worked in harmony with nature, and how that sort of contrasted with modern industrial agriculture. In 1974, he had a student, David Holmgren, and he collaborated with him to develop the concept of permaculture, which is a word that a lot of people would be familiar with. It was originally framed as permanent agriculture, but was later expanded to permanent culture. So the term permanent agriculture had been mentioned several decades before, but not as the portmanteau, the combination of words that we see with permaculture. And it is worth noting that Mollison and Holmgren brought together the learnings from many systems. So whilst they created the concept described as permaculture, they do acknowledge that it's got roots going way, way back. It's just they systematized it. So they put out their book Permaculture 1 in 1978, and it's, if you haven't heard of it, it's a holistic design system and ethic for creating sustainable, resilient human habitats by observing and mimicking patterns and relationships found in natural ecosystems. So it's got three core principles: earth care, people care, and fair share. So it's a set of design principles that's based around observing what's going on, interacting, catching and storing energy, which can be something like the sun, or it can be running water, and it can be wind, basically anything that gets described as energy, obtaining a yield from it, producing no waste, and using edges and valuing the marginal. Integrates elements like perennial plants, polycultures, soil building, water harvesting, animal systems, and appropriate technology to create self-regulating resilient systems with minimal external inputs. There's a few lists with this because it's a big topic. If you've heard about it before, you won't be surprised to hear all these bits and pieces. If you haven't heard about it before, just let it flow over you a little bit. We've got links in the show notes, and you can delve into it. It's just a massive thing, and I'm aware of a little bit of it. But looking up here on Bill Mollison, I didn't actually know that it was so big. So he founded the Permaculture Institute in Tasmania in 1979. He taught the first permaculture design course in Stanley, Tasmania, in January 1980 at the old hotel, attended by 10 students. So the permaculture design course became the main educational vehicle for spreading this knowledge. So they sent out key publications afterwards, design manuals and other courses that Mollison and Holmgren had developed. it's gone from being something that started in Tassie into a global movement. He went on teaching tours and books and train the trainer models of the permaculture design course, which is part of how it works so well. He was very concerned about, listen, he's not going to, he didn't want to sort of be the holder of the knowledge, the guru, and everyone must come to him. It was, listen, how can I get as many people as possible doing this stuff? And one of the ways that he did it was, I'll train you how to train other people, and you go off and do your thing. Now, that fragmenting, trying to think of a word other than bifurcation. Maybe it is bifurcation, but that fragmenting of it is a bit of a double-edged sword, because there's people sort of like glom onto the permaculture thing, and it's a good label, and they have a little bit of knowledge and run with it. But as a way of spreading this knowledge, it was predominantly very, very successful. So by the 1980s and 1990s, it had gone over to North America, India, Europe, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. It just took off. And by 2011, there had been more than 300,000 permaculture design course graduates worldwide, all practicing and teaching. So, it's a bit of a jump up from the original 10.
That's a huge success story.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a massive jump. Now, most of us, and I'll include most of us, because for me, with not knowing all this stuff about it, we hear the word permaculture, and we sort of basically just think of gardening.
Yeah.
It's also got exactly. It's got a much wider social and economic side as well. So it's also a design framework for how people organise money, communities, institutions, and everyday life. So like in money and banking, a permaculture-inspired approach to finance tries to keep money circulating locally, support mutual aid, and reduce dependence on extractive institutions. So things like local currency, barter, time banking, credit unions, crowdfunding, and community developed finance as alternatives or complements to conventional banking. So the underlying idea is sort of similar to ecological design, where he wants the money to function like a nutrient stream, moving where it's needed and supporting regeneration rather than just sort of leaking out of the system. There's also community organising, where permaculture treats communities as systems that can be designed, not just sort of social groups that happen by chance. So that includes intentional networks for sharing tools, labour, knowledge and risk, decision-making structures that distribute power, and projects like eco-villages or cooperative housing, where people coordinate land and energy and shared resources. Also extends into governance, education, and culture. And people within the movement talk about designing institutions that are small enough to stay responsive, diverse enough to adapt, and fair enough to keep trust over time, which is a big thing. So that's sort of why some people, when they talk about permaculture, they talk about it as a political, cultural framework, not just a gardening method. So those ethics of care and fairness and limits can be applied to, organisations, schools, cooperatives, local economies. So the pros of it's commonly associated with long-term sustainability and reduced environmental impact. There's potential for lower ongoing costs once it's established, support for biodiversity and ecosystems, adaptability to local conditions through the observation and the actual methodology, empowerment of individuals and communities through practical skills and self-reliance. And there have been a lot of scientific studies that found measurable improvements in soil quality and biodiversity on permacultural sites compared with ones that have just done the conventional one. There's some cons where they're talking about there's a higher initial labour and knowledge requirement. Potential vulnerability to pests and disease in polyculture systems. Though I would argue monocultural systems can be wiped out by a single one, but I do get their point, which I'm so both sides. Difficulties in scaling to large commercial operations. Depending on context and market access, you might get variations in economic returns, and there's also a need for more rigorous, public accessible scientific evidence in some areas. So some critics have said, claims of outpace verifiable data, and also land access and initial setup costs can be barriers. And also, too, unsurprisingly, there's different interpretations of permaculture, which can lead to inconsistent application or dilution of core principles. But it's got a lot of runs on the board, a lot of proof, a lot of people who can talk very coherently and demonstrate actual results. Today, permaculture stands as a more established and diverse global movement than it's in early decades. While it remains mainly grassroots and decentralised, it has got broader recognition alongside the growing interest in sustainable and regenerative systems. So it keeps its influence going through ongoing teaching and demonstration sites and adaptation to new contexts. So like Moo Nut Recur, the nut, that is an eye-catching part of this week's Two Ticks Town Talk of Stanley, Tasmania, permaculture is closely tied to the environment, but its core remains identifiable and unique.
That's like genuinely amazing. I had no idea like permaculture was like developed here in Australia with that history. I mean, obviously,
because you knew the name as soon as I said it.
Yeah, but I didn't like. It's the sort of thing that like I've heard of, but not like known too deeply the sort of history and stuff like that. And I guess in some ways, it's kind of hard to claim that like these guys did develop it, because as a concept, it's probably been around since forever, basically. The idea that you kind of live in harmony with the environment to use its strengths and weaknesses to be able to develop a garden and stuff like that. So in my mind, it's kind of like, you're like a steward of the land rather than we're just demolishing everything and just putting whatever putting monocrops in and stuff like that. So, and I think that's been quite popular through the years. But obviously, the idea of permaculture itself and the skills they teach you, and I'm sure the the actual courses that you learn and stuff like that will go way beyond that and actually into like processes that genuinely do work and have been scientifically studied and so on and so forth, like you said. So it's so interesting though that like, and I'm so pleased that it is catching on and is becoming more of a thing. And I sort of wonder if there are people around the world, which I'm certain there are, that if you come into their community and go, oh, we're going to do like a permaculture thing, and you sit them down and start explaining them, they'll probably go, wait, do you not do this already? Like, this is what we've always done.
Yeah, probably right.
Because I do feel like in some ways it is kind of like a natural progression to a point. I mean, obviously, like industrial scale agriculture is so unnatural, and as a result requires so many more inputs and energy and time to make it work, because you're depleting the land on a scale that it's really not designed to cope with. Whereas permaculture is kind of that opposite idea of like living kind of with the environment. Like let's make these plants happy, and then they will give us what they give us. And it's less of that kind of like, I don't know, for lack of a better term, that capitalistic sort of mindset with agriculture, which doesn't really work on a massive industrial scale. Well, possibly not. I don't know. I'm not sure if there's ever been an experiment on that level, on an industrial level. I think it would be very, very hard to get going. But once it is up and running, it could be massively beneficial. So I think it's such an interesting, almost like a really simple concept, but in practice, it's actually quite difficult because you've got to really understand the ecosystem that you're working with, the climate, the interactions between plants. Like, there's so much that goes into it, and I guess over generations, people have kind of figured things out. You know, that these plants go together, and for whether they understand the actual like processes that are underlying that or not. But yeah, how amazing. I had no idea that the sort of modern idea of permaculture was developed by Aussies in Tasmania. How incredible.
Yeah. So there you go. I remember hearing, because there's a podcast I'd listened to, the Survival podcast by Jack Spirko, and he's a big fan of permaculture. Like, in fact, he as I understand it, he was mates with Mollison, or certainly, you know, very, very good acquaintances. Mollison's dead now, but I think it was God, I should have that name running off my thing. I'm scrolling back. Holmgren, yes. I think it was Holmgren that had done a project in one of the deserts for I can't remember the Arabian country that it was, and that's not important. But what he had done, or one of his students, they had observed, and this is a big thing that keeps getting hammered whenever this comes up. Yeah, observe what's happening. Just look at the environment, and they had moved all this sand in a particular way, like great big mounds of it. And it took a few years, but what they had observed was, the wind came from this part. This particular type of wind had a little bit of moisture. If you had the sand up higher, it'd just drop a touch more moisture on the other side. And then over the years, a little bit of moisture came in, nature did her stuff, and weeds started. And then those weeds started to bind the soil, and then once it gets a certain amount of binding, you can then start to plant the plants that you want. And all these big mounds of sand actually became structures for creating these gardens and plant and food supply areas, just by that observation, saying, well, let's do this, and we'll let nature do its stuff. And that sort of struck me as almost a bit magical.
I think that's such a good way just to describe nature, and I know it sounds kind of corny, but yeah, it is kind of magical. Like, you if you just leave things alone, they will just forever continue to develop into whatever's the most suitable there. You know, that is really like the fight of life, if you want to call it. And I think it can be really annoying. You know, we all don't love mowing our lawns and all the rest. But you can end up using less effort, less inputs, whether that just be even natural inputs like water, which is very important for Australia. You can with less effort and less inputs, you can end up with more if you're smart about how you do it. And of course, that process and that learning does take time and understanding and all of that kind of stuff. But I think we're getting there. I think we've come to realize that we can't just keep doing what we're doing. We need to be smarter and more resourceful with the resources that we actually have. Look, one of the big ones that I know a lot of people do know of is stuff like what do they call it? Like sheet mulching, where you put cardboard boxes, or even like the relevant to Australia, the paper bags, the Coles and Woolworths paper bags. I see that asked quite often online about whether the ink in them is biodegradable, and I think the Woolies ones are. I'm not sure about the Coles ones, because people do this a lot where they cover up the garden with cardboard essentially, and it acts like mulching, and as a result you end up with a hell of a lot less weeds, and it keeps the moisture in the soil, and and this and that and everything else. So that's one of those ones that it can look a little bit ugly when you're walking past, going like, who left all this cardboard on the garden? But the benefits,
you can put a bit of mulch. Mrs. Ardeet's a big fan of that, but we just whack a little bit of mulch on top, so you get the it looks nice, but you still get that benefit. Even better,
right? And the other one that I know of that I have done in the past and will do when I build some new garden beds, I think it's called hugel culture or something like that, where you deliberately put large chunks of wood, which just seems so counter to how I think it's German or might be Danish or something like that.
It's from that sort of Germanic area, because it's an old way of doing things.
Yeah, and it's really, really beneficial where you pile. So for our listeners that don't know what we're talking about, imagine you've got like a raised garden bed is probably the easiest thing to visualize. Basically, a big box that you want to build a garden in. You throw some logs, sticks, just anything basically in the bottom there, any sort of wood product in the bottom there, which helps you take up a lot of volume so that you don't need to use way more soil. And then you put on top of that, I think you put like leaves. There's sort of like a few layers that you sort of build up, like leaves and a bit of soil, and then I think you put like compost on, and then you put your nice good nutrient topsoil and stuff like that on top. And basically the idea is, as it all decomposes underneath, it releases more nutrients for the plants that are growing up on top, but it also helps retain heaps more water, so you're not wasting water as much as well. So which is where I was doing it for, was, well, two things, was the moisture retention and also the basically not having to buy more soil, because I got plenty of wood, and wood's pretty cheap, so fill up those garden beds with that stuff as well. So I didn't realize these were part of permaculture, which but I guess it's a system of systems, isn't it?
Yes, great way to put it. It's a system of perfect way. Yeah.
Which, look, I think it's so cool, and I had no idea that there was such a strong Australian connection there. Wow. How friggin' interesting. Look, if you don't know what permaculture is, I would encourage, but you like to garden and that sort of stuff, I would encourage you to go and have a look at that. That's for sure.
And you can just take a bite from it. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to go off and do all the course, but you can take a little bit from it. Even that thing of sitting there observing and saying, where's the shade? Where's the wind? Where's the rain going in my garden? I'm doing a little bit. And if that whets your appetite for more, great. But as I said, there's a whole lot of things I was listing out because it's so big. But if you get that little summary of the mindset and just try one or two things, it's still going to be beneficial.
Definitely.